Chapter 4 Go Fish. I was sitting at my desk after lunch, and Mrs. Maxey had her back to us and was writing a long list of spelling words she had taken out of The Great Gilly Hopkins, which was so good I actually could listen to it for more than a minute at a time. But now that I had heard it all, I was playing with the house key that was on a long string around my neck. I loved touching that old brass key with the smooth round top that looked like a tiny face. It was like touching something magic. I didn't know how it locked and unlocked doors, it just did. Mom had given me the key since my grandma wasn't around, and I got home from school 2 hours before she got home from work. She trusted me with the key, and we had a rule that I went directly home, and once inside I could do anything I wanted except light the gas stove, take a bath, make joke phone calls to strangers, or throw the baseball at the walls, because it dented them. And once I was in the house, I was forbidden to step outside or open the door for strangers. This was okay with me, because like I told the doctor, the kids in my neighborhood were pretty mean. Once a few of them caught me on the way home from school. A kid named Ford held me down and tied a leash around my neck. "Roll over," he hollered, and I did. "Play dead," he ordered. That scared me, and I jerked my head out of the leash, which ripped one of my nose holes so that it bled. But I got away. Now I don't open the door for no one. I was messing with my house key, and before long I had it in my mouth, and I was playing a game. I was trying to train myself to swallow the key so I could slowly pull it back up from inside my belly, up my throat, and into my mouth, like I was fishing for bottom feeders. It hurt to do it because sometimes the key got caught sideways down my throat, but when it did, I just gave the string a tug and straightened it out. The only other problem was that every now and again it made me gag so hard I almost threw up. Since I was doing it after lunch, I thought it would be especially colorful because bits and pieces of food would stick to the key and around the string, and I'd suck them off and re-swallow them. Mrs. Maxey must have turned around, but I never saw her. I was still fishing and wondering if I could pull my liver up, or my kidney, or some organ we had studied in science, when suddenly Mrs. Maxey swooped down on me. With one hand, she yanked the string out of my mouth, which really hurt because the key was about halfway down my throat. Then with her other hand, she took her sharp, teacher-only pointy scissors and cut the string off the key and put the key in my t-shirt pocket. "Keep your mind on your work," she said, tapping the rule sheet on my desk. "Now sit up and listen." "Okay," I said, and quickly sat on my hands. As soon as she left, I pulled an old photograph of me out of my jeans and set it on my desk. It was a picture of me standing very still, with my hands by my side and my eyes looking directly at the camera. I looked like a little statue. It's a wonder a bird didn't land on my head for a rest. "See," Mom said when she gave the photograph to me, "this is proof that you can be still. So whenever you feel out of control, look at this picture and it will remind you to calm down." I looked at the picture and stared into the little eyes and tried to remember what I was thinking when I was so little. But I had no clue, so my mind wandered, and before long I didn't remember about the string missing, and I plucked the key out of my shirt pocket and popped it into my mouth. I stuck my tongue out so Seth Justman could see the key from his desk in the next row. "What do you give me if I swallow this?" I whispered. "$1," he said. And he was good for it too, because he wasn't on free breakfast and free lunch, so I knew he had food money on him. This will be a fast buck, I thought. So I worked up my mouth full of saliva and swallowed hard, and the key scraped down my throat a little sideways. But I did it, all the way down. I opened my mouth to show Seth, and he was pretty amazed, and dug into his pocket and gave me $1. Then I reached for my chin to pull the string, but I only felt my lips. And suddenly I remembered there was no string. And I hopped straight up onto my desk seat screaming, "Mrs. Maxey, I ate my key!" Everyone spun around and stared at me, and Mrs. Maxey's eyes bugged out because she knew she had cut the string. "Oh, my Lord!" she shouted. She grabbed me and ran to Mrs. Deeb's room next door. "Watch my class!" she cried in a desperate voice, and then trotted me down to the nurse. Nurse Holyfield listened calmly to Mrs. Maxey, who was anything but calm. Then she unlocked a white cabinet and removed a small brown bottle and plastic spoon. "Ipecac," the nurse explained. "It'll make you throw up like a champ, I promise." She gave me a green plastic dish to hold under my chin. It looked like a wading pool for sea monkeys. Then she gave me a spoonful of medicine that tasted so bad it made me vomit up everything I had eaten all last week. She stirred through the vomit with a plastic fork, but no key. She gave me a second spoonful and I gave her all of last year's food. Still no key. "Should we call the doctor?" asked Mrs. Maxey. Nay, said the nurse. At this point, it's either cut him open or let nature take its course. I vote for nature, I said. And I have a class to get back to, Mrs. Maxey said. I'll tell Mrs. Jarzeb he's down here and she can take care of him. While we waited, the nurse said she wanted to play a game with me. I'm good at card games, I said. Grandma taught me how to play poker. No, she said. I want to ask you questions. I want you to answer them. What? I asked. I was still thinking about poker and how much I missed Grandma. Well, you just answered my first question, she said. Do you lose a lot of things? It wasn't that I hated being asked a bunch of questions. I had nothing against questions. I just didn't like listening to them because some questions take forever to make sense. Sometimes waiting for a question to finish is like watching someone draw an elephant starting with the tail first. As soon as you see the tail, your mind wanders all over the place and you think of a million other animals that also have tails until you don't care about the elephant because it's only one thing when you've been thinking about a million others. Do you lose a lot of things? She asked. Keys, I said, and gave her a big smile. One day I lost my pants. I took them off in the bathroom and forgot where I left them. Do you like animals? I love animals, I replied. I want to get a dog. When Mrs. Jarzeb, the principal, arrived, Nurse Holyfield talked with her out in the hall. When they were finished, Mrs. Jarzeb told me to follow her. Joey, you need a little extra help, she said, as we walked down the main hallway. Think of it this way. Students who have trouble with math get extra math help. Or if they have trouble reading, we give them reading help. I can read fine, I said. That's right, she said, and patted my head. But you can't sit still very long and keep your mind on your work. So we're going to give you some sitting help. We went down a set of stairs to the basement. Are we going to visit the janitor? I asked. No, she replied. This summer we put in a special ed room to help out kids who need some extra help or attention. I heard about it, I said. Mrs. Maxey said I was going to be sent there if I didn't settle down. She was right, Mrs. Jarzeb replied. Then she opened a door and we went into a big, bright yellow room that still smelled from fresh paint. Everyone is very friendly, she said, so don't be afraid. You'll probably know some of the children. But it was hard not to be scared. There were a few kids from upstairs, but the room was mostly filled with the hurt kids, the slow kids, the kids who steered their wheelchairs with their chins, the spastic kids who walked and talked funny and were brought to school in their own special bus or in special cars from home. I always wondered where they went once they arrived. Now I knew. Plus, there were a lot of women hovering around who turned out to be moms, helping the teacher with their kids. It was pretty surprising to me that they weren't at work because mine was always working. But I guess these moms had a whole job just taking care of their kids, which is why I didn't belong there. Otherwise, my mom couldn't work. Can I go back up to my class now? I asked Mrs. Jarzeb. After a while, she replied. First, I need to introduce you to Mrs. Howard. I looked away, far away to a shiny corner of the room, because even my grandma taught me that it wasn't polite to stare at crippled kids. Then I looked back, and a few of them were looking at me, which was okay because I was normal. I waved to them, and they waved in return, some better than others, and I felt a little more relaxed thinking they were nice. I only broke a few rules, I said to the principal. There's nothing wrong with me but that. I know, she said, but we're going to help you learn not to break them. I've already learned that, I said. I'll never swallow another key again, I promise. I'm sure you won't, she replied. Just then Mrs. Howard walked over and smiled at me. This is the student I spoke with you about, Mrs. Jarzeb said to her. Then she turned to me. Joey, she said, I want you to listen to Mrs. Howard and do everything she tells you to do. We're going to give you a little extra help with sitting still and staying on task. I felt like some kind of bad dog that had pooped all over the carpet, eaten the slippers, and attacked the mailman, and was now being sent to obedience school. Mrs. Howard led me by my hand to the tall metal chair in the corner of the room. This, she said, is the big, quiet chair. I call it step number 1. The first thing I want to find out is how long you can sit still. I climbed up into the giant chair and sat back and just stared at her. I must have looked pretty calm on the outside, like I was really normal and that this was all a big mistake, because she smiled at me and gave me a dopey picture book to read. But inside my body, I felt like a big bottle of warm Coke when you drop it in the grocery store and it begins to fizz out the top like a bomb about to blow. Then she went back to help some kid who still had his bicycle helmet on and had fallen over. I flipped through the book so fast I couldn't tell you a thing about it except that it was made out of paper. Then I picked at my finger bandage until I had it unrolled. And then I started rocking back and forth, but the chair wouldn't rock. So I heaved myself from side to side. It still didn't move. I gripped the arms and jerked myself around and hung way out over the arms like some rodeo rider on a wild bill. But the chair didn't budge an inch. When I looked down at the legs, I saw it was bolted to the floor. Bolted, as if I was some kind of circus freak. So I rocked even harder, then took the heels of my shoes and kicked at the legs, and since it was metal, it started clanging real loud like the heating pipes, and that's when Mrs. Howard came dashing back over. She put her hands on my knees, and I slowed down for a minute. Then she reached down and untied my laces. She held my sneakers in her hand and said, "I'll be right back." She went into a closet and returned with a pair of those fuzzy bunny rabbit slippers, the kind with the big buck teeth on the toes and the long ears you can trip over. She put them on my feet and said, "Okay, you can kick the chair all you want, and every time you come here, until you sit still and stop kicking, you have to wear these slippers." Over her shoulder, some of the other moms were looking at me, and they had tired faces. Not tired and mad like I had screwed up somehow and they were upset. It was different. They were tired from being so sad, and now they were sad some more because I was screwed up too. And they felt bad for me like they felt for their own kids because they figured I wasn't ever going to get better. And it made me so mad to be stared at like some hopeless kid that I kicked away at the chair legs until my heels were so sore they were bruised and it hurt to kick. Then suddenly it just seemed all the energy drained out of me, and the yellow walls were so bright I closed my eyes and fell asleep. Toward the end of the day, Mrs. Howard woke me up and said it was time for me to go back up to Mrs. Maxey's class so I could get my homework assignment. I did, only I was still wearing those buck-toothed rabbit slippers, and when I shuffled into class rubbing my eyes, Seth Justin pointed at me and started to snicker, and the whole class cracked up, and Mrs. Maxey had to clap her hands to settle everyone down. Then she led me to my seat. She gave me an "I mean business" look and tapped on my tasks list. "Remember, Joey," she said right into my ear, "stick to the rules and you won't get into trouble." Even though she was being nice, I didn't know what to say, and I put my head down on my desk. It felt so cool against my cheek, and I wanted to sleep some more. "And I think you owe the class an apology for being disruptive earlier," she said. "I'm sorry I swallowed my key," I said a little too loudly without raising my head. "Really, I'm sorry." But I didn't feel sorry, and I could feel myself just wanting to jump up and run. So I hooked my slippers around the front legs of the desk and tried hard to look at one solid thing, like the big jack-o'-lantern on the window, and get a two-handed grip on my desktop, because if I slipped and lost concentration and didn't pay attention to my highlighted tasks list, Mrs. Maxey might have no other choice but to give up on me for good and send me full-time down to special ed. And there would be nothing I could do about it, or my mom, or anyone, because I've been warned so many times there's a file on my bad behavior as thick as the phone book. So I hung on to my desktop, and with all my might, I held myself in my seat as if some giant was holding me. And I don't think I even breathed until the bell rang and I blasted out of my seat and headed for home, still wearing those dumb slippers. I was sitting on the porch when Mom returned from work, and I just mixed her a drink and didn't whisper a word about what happened today. But she found out anyway when Mrs. Jarzab called the house later that night.